Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to the Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello again, everybody. This is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. This program is first broadcast on July 2nd. According to the Trump plan, on July 1st, Israel can apply sovereignty to 30% of the land west of the Jordan River. And for the last several months, there's been considerable discussion of whether Israel should indeed start to apply sovereignty by annexing the Jordan Valley. The Jordan Valley is vital to Israel because it's a defense line against attack from the east. I'm at a disadvantage because I prepare my program on Wednesday, so I don't know whether Israel indeed applies sovereignty today. So I prepared my program by discussing the various possible results of annexation. That's the first difficulty. And I also chose to spend time on this program discussing what's happening in the United States, because what happens in the United States affects the entire world, and particularly the Middle East. Following the news about current events in the United States is somewhat depressing, because the breakdown in law and order that I never saw in my lifetime, and it is indeed worrying. There's rioting and the growth of crime is getting more out of control in the last month, and the authorities in the big cities in the United States seem to be losing control. Or worse, they've chosen to lose control. Or even worse, it appears one of the major political parties, the Democratic Party, has moved radically to the left, and Israel has always depended on bipartisan political support. But that may now be in danger, because the farther the American political party moves to the left, the less it is supportive of Israel, and that's dangerous. So there's an awful lot happening, and it's difficult to engage in in-depth analysis in a short program. So what I'll try to do, I'll try to touch on the issues that I think are important and leave more analysis for later programs when hopefully the dust will settle and we'll know what is really happening there so that we can comment on it. In the meantime, it is a very fluid situation. Obviously an interesting one, but that's all I can say for it. Interesting and fluid. I'll be back after the break.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to the Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. We are approaching what may be one of the most fateful dates in Jewish history. According to the plans we are told by our government, on the 30th of June, or shortly afterwards, Israel will apply Israeli sovereignty over the 30% of the part of the Eretz Israel that's been assigned to us according to the Trump plan. Primarily the Jordan Valley. And there's pressure within Israel, pro and con, either to do it or not to do it. A lot of argument here about it. So I want to say a few words as background. Keep in mind that a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River will not bring peace. It is likely to spark regional conflicts and will threaten Israel's very existence. That is the meaning of what's called the two-state solution, a Palestinian state. It is a euphemism for the destruction of Israel, which is why many support it, that is in Europe and other places, and also oppose any extension of Israeli law and sovereignty to areas of Jewish settlement in Judea and Samaria. Keep in mind that talking about peace will not bring peace. It must be backed up by a sincere desire to end the conflict, but there is no sincere desire shown by the other side, in particular the Palestinians. Since Trump announced his plan, the heads of the Palestinian Authority refused to even sit down at the table and discuss it. We are talking about extending Israeli sovereignty some areas which are currently under Israeli control, like the Jordan Valley, which have substantial Jewish populations and Jewish infrastructure, and which are strategically important. That makes sense. This will ensure the future of the State of Israel and allow it to absorb large numbers of Jews who want to come here and live, to make Aliyah. It will end Israel's anachronistic military rule over those areas. It will protect the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan to the east of us and encourage Jordan's economic development. And it could be a realistic basis for real peace. I myself, I have a home, and I lived for 35 years in Karnei Shomron, which is in Samaria, and we are essentially under military control. So the most discussed subject in diplomatic circles of the West is Israel's proposed extension of sovereignty over additional parts of our country. This is perceived by many of the international community as depriving the Palestinian Arabs of their land, which is, of course, illegal under international law, if indeed it was their land. But that's another story. They also argued that it would make impossible a contiguous Palestinian state. So, as I said, we're talking about July 1st. However, there's a great deal of confusion as to the precise extent of this proposed sovereignty. Our Prime Minister has been playing the cards very close to his chest. So when we talk about July 1st as a day for sovereignty, we don't really know what that means at the moment. Now, we are being condemned because those who disagree claim that it prevents contiguity and free movement within the Palestinian state, if there were a Palestinian state. And also the Palestinians have already indicated they'll never tolerate any Israelis living within their state. This is a condition often repeated by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Yet, strangely enough, if you will, Arabs reside and move freely inside Israel, particularly in the Galilee and the Negev, and they are Israeli citizens with voting rights. Now, there is debate within Israel whether it is diplomatically advisable at this time to implement any extension of sovereignty, because there is strong international opposition and warnings by even some of the Arab states that have more or less warmed up to Israel recently. Their warming up to Israel is primarily because of their fear of Iran. But that's another story. Anyhow, our government is facing a dilemma. There is a considerable constituency, even within the Likud party, the Prime Minister's party, requesting him to nevertheless declare sovereignty according to the plan. So if you check back over history, it's very interesting. We've waited very long in the hope that a solution would be found. It could well be And there are those who believe, and I think I'm one of them, that it's now time to end the illusion that peace can be achieved by giving up yet more of our homeland and establishing a Palestinian entity within it. I think that the whole process since Oslo back in the early 1990s show us that there is absolutely no partner for peace, so we should go ahead and do what we think is best for us. Most secular supporters who advocate for annexation base their claim on the resolution of the Balfour Declaration of 1917 after the First World War and the San Remo Conference of 1920 and the recognition in 1948 and afterwards of the State of Israel by 162 members of the UN. The Balfour Statement after the First World War, by the way, I just want to remind the listeners, was a statement issued by the British government announcing support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. The declaration was contained in a letter dated November 2nd, 1917, from the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, Balfour, to Lord Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, for transmission to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain. So, and it was published in the press on November 9th, 1917. So, and the League of Nations and the United Nations, which is inherited the League of Nations, was given essentially a mandate to establish a Jewish state here in Palestine. And by the way, in Palestine at that time meant both sides of the Jordan River, but Winston Churchill, as the colonial secretary, I think in 1922, cut off the part east of the Jordan River and gave it to the one of the Hashemite princes who subsequently turned it into the Kingdom of Jordan. So to begin with, the Jews were willing to compromise. Then in 1948, under the resolution of the United Nations, which divided the Palestine into a Jewish and Arab state, again, the Jews were willing to compromise and to accept a state on part of the land which actually was given to them after the First World War. I'm not even talking about the religious and historical background. What I'm saying is, and I'm sure the listeners know this, they have to be reminded once in a while that after the First World War, essentially the Jewish Agency, which was the Jewish government at that time, was willing to accept a division and only accept the land west of the Jordan River. In 1948, the State of Israel was willing to accept even less than that and divide that area west of the Jordan River. Now, it all fell into our hands in the Six-Day War. And now we are debating whether or not to apply sovereignty to that part of the land which is under our control, starting with the Jordan Valley, which is our eastern defense line. That is the way things stand now. And whether our government does it or not, we will know starting on the 1st of July. It doesn't have to be the 1st of July. It could be afterward, if at all. So we're approaching an extremely historic moment. And when I say historic, I don't mean in recent history. I mean historic in the sense of Jewish history. We were thrown out of here several thousand years ago. We came back. And now there is a possibility of us extending our sovereignty over parts of our original homeland that we were willing to compromise with up until now. So this is an extremely historic and vital period in Jewish history, and it's sort of exciting. I just wanted to give the listeners some of the background information because I think it's important. We have to remind ourselves of where we've been and where we stand now, and to look forward to decide exactly where we're going and if we're going and when we're going. So I just wanted to share that with the listeners. I'll be back after the break.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
We're back again with Jay Shapiro. There are two subjects that I want to talk about in this segment of the program, and I'll be quite candid with the listeners that I didn't really prepare. I didn't write out any notes. What happened was that several things have happened, and my response to them is almost what you would call a gut response. Two things have happened among a lot of other things, and because of those things, which I'll tell in a moment what they are, I am worried about democracy in America. I think democracy might be in danger because the political and the academic leadership are kowtowing to the mob. This unfortunately reminds me of what happened in Germany in the 1930s, when academia there and the political leadership essentially followed Hitler more or less blindly. It's a very complicated subject, but I just want to touch upon what's bothering me. Two things have happened in the last couple of weeks. After a black man was killed, actually murdered by the police in Minneapolis, the leadership, the Democratic leadership of Congress, made a sort of a ritual. They went down on their knees for 9 minutes, which was the amount of time that this black fellow was held down by the policeman, and they sort of made a ritual out of showing that they are in sympathy with what happened, a theatrical ritual. That's the first thing. The other has to do with the fact that the Princeton University, has changed the name of a school that previously carried the name of Woodrow Wilson, and who was an American president. He was the governor of New Jersey. Before that, he was a college professor, and he was known to be a racist himself. For example, during the First World War, when they wanted to integrate black soldiers, he said that the army is not a place for social experimentation. It didn't take until after the Second World War when a president from Missouri, a southern state, actually integrated the army. But what my point on the subject I'm discussing now is that Princeton University has decided to remove the name of Woodrow Wilson. Now, to give you an idea of the response to this, and I will read a letter that was sent to the Princeton University president by a graduate of the university who lives in Israel, who I know personally, and I've worked with on many occasions because we worked on things dealing with settlement here in Israel. His name is Mark Zell. He graduated from Princeton University in 1974. He wrote a letter which I want to read to you to the head of Princeton University. He said the following: "Your message." This is to the president. The president's name is Eisgruber. He wrote the following: "Your message announcing the decision of the Board of Trustees and the administration. I am profoundly offended by this decision and the lack of fortitude demonstrated by the current university administration. I always believed that Princeton had more courage than to follow the herds of apologists for a national tragedy that occurred so long ago. It is one thing to acknowledge the dark side of American history. It is another thing to revise it and erase the names of the people who made that history. The decision to erase Woodrow Wilson's name from the School of Public Policy is the height of hypocrisy. Will Princeton also disassociate itself from James Madison, a slave owner?" By the way, I interrupt my reading to tell you that of the 56 signers of the American Declaration of Independence, 41 were slave owners. The first 5 presidents of the United States were slave owners. Getting back to the letter, most of all, what about the anti-Semites Princeton has spawned or honored, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Breckinridge Long, who was the proponent of the late U.S. response to the Holocaust, and significantly James Forrestal, who was the opponent of the establishment of the Jewish state after the Holocaust, after whom an entire university campus is named. And then there is Harvey Firestone, whose name adorns Princeton's world-famous library. Here is what one author had to say about him and the notorious Jew-hater Henry Ford. Neil Baldwin, author of Henry Ford and the Jews, recalls that Ford, inventor Thomas Jefferson, and tire magnate Harvey Firestone used to go on motorcar expeditions to the hills of Appalachia and New England. Around their campfires, berating the Jews was a frequent practice. It was as well when pioneering aviator Charles Lindbergh and Ford became buddies. President Eisgruber, you yourself are Jewish halachically and by choice. Should Princeton also disassociate itself from these prominent but misguided men? As a former president of Princeton's Hillel Foundation, I might have standing to make a request. In my day, it was enough that Princeton dropped its numerous clauses for Jews, especially from the Northeast. Still, I would not dare make such a request to revise the history of my alma mater by striking the names of these gentlemen and many more who I have not mentioned, as you and the Board of Trustees have done to Woodrow Wilson. Let it be known that I am an active Republican and no great admirer of some of President Wilson's policies, let alone his despicable segregationist views. But as you mentioned, he transformed Princeton and shaped the future of our nation and the world. He appointed the first Jew, Louis Brandeis, to the U.S. Supreme Court. Indeed, were it not for the Allied victory in World War I, for which Wilson is largely responsible, the state of Israel I have made my home for the last 34 years would likely never have been born. The stain of slavery is forever imprinted on the American experience. As a nation, we were able to put an end to this horrible institution through civil war and through our constitutional institutions. We must, of course, acknowledge the evil of slavery and work to obliterate its deleterious aftermath. As a nation, we have done a commendable job through the work, although the work is not complete. Having said this, it is not necessary to purge the names and monuments to men like Woodrow Wilson and the anti-Semites mentioned above from our memory and from the memory of our progeny. To the contrary, when our children ask who Woodrow Wilson and these others were, we must remember to tell them the whole story, their achievements and their failures. That is what I would have expected of a great university like Princeton. Signed, L. Mark Zell, class of 1974. So essentially what you have here, the fact that the Princeton University taking the name of Woodrow Wilson off a school and off a building, and the fact, as I mentioned previously, that the Democratic leadership of the American Congress went through a theatrical bow down of 9 minutes because a black man was murdered by a policeman. What they're doing is kowtowing to the mob. And when you kowtow to the mob, when the intellectuals kowtow to the mob, when the politicians kowtow to the mob, the nation is in serious trouble. That is what happened in Nazi Germany. All the people who should have known better kowtowed to the mob. And what's in Germany, of course, the Nazis were violent too. They were thugs. They're not so thuggish in the United States. But as I look at television, I read the news, and I see what's happening to the major cities in the United States, I worry for the health of the United States. And if the United States is in trouble, the entire world is in trouble. I never thought I would live to see this situation that we're looking at now. And it really is a very dangerous situation, one that has not occurred in my lifetime. And indeed, I don't think it's occurred in the history of the United States. You have a situation where society, the leaders of society, are allowing themselves to be pushed around by the mob. And when you let yourself be pushed around by the mob, you're in big trouble. You should know, but the reason there is intellectual and political leadership is to see to it that a country stays on the right path. If the leadership doesn't stay on the right path, the entire country is in trouble. I didn't mean to be long-winded about this, but when I saw these items in the paper, it really and truly disturbed me. I hate to think of what's going to happen to the United States if the present trend continues, and those who know better are keeping silence or going along and agreeing with what's happening. You can see that with the mayors of the cities also and the governors of the states. The United States is in great danger, and my heart really cries for this situation. I'll be back after the break.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hi, you're back with Jay Shapiro. Before I continue, I want to make two quick corrections. In the previous segment, I referred to the fact that Henry Ford went on picnics with Thomas Jefferson. What I meant was Thomas Edison. I also said the first 6 presidents of the United States were slave owners. I have to make a correction. The second president and the 6th president were both Adams. John Adams the first, and then his son. They were not slave owners. But there were other American presidents up until the Civil War who were indeed slave owners. I just wanted to straighten that out. Now I want to talk about something that was a little bit closer to home, and I'm sort of in a spot because this program goes on the air on Thursday, the 2nd of July, which is the day when our government can make a decision whether or not they want to apply Israeli sovereignty to 30% of the so-called West Bank, or at least to the Jordan Valley. So what are the options in front of us? The Palestinians have threatened violence. The Arab states have threatened to stop cooperation. The Europeans have threatened sanctions. Some U.S. Democrats have threatened a reassessment of the ties, including the probable candidate for the presidency, Joe Biden. But there still remains one big imponderable, and that is, what will Israel itself do? And despite all the background noise, many Israelis are grappling with the question, what should it do? Should it indeed go ahead with annexation or applying sovereignty, which is not the same as annexation? According to the terms of the Trump administration's deal of the century, Israel can extend its sovereignty up to 30% of Judea and Samaria. It also calls for the establishment of a Palestinian state on the remaining 70% of the so-called West Bank, plus some land inside sovereign Israel that will be swapped to bring the area of the Palestinian state up to the what it constituted before the Six-Day War. Now, why do it now? That's the first question. Those in favor of what's generally become known as annexation, although some argue this is an improper use of the word, you can only annex land that was part of another country, and the area known as the West Bank never belonged to another state. So if you put it, Israel wants to assert its control over the territory, it's not annexation. It's applying sovereignty. Now, some people argue the time to move is now. The reasons are obvious. We have a U.S. president in office who's put his name on a plan which allows or sanctions that move. And at the moment, there's a global pandemic, and the minds of the leaders of other countries are on other things. Our prime minister has repeatedly spoken of this as a historic opportunity. It's historic in the sense that Israel does not know when there will be another U.S. administration that understands the rationale behind Israeli settlement and does not view those settlements as the peace obstacles. Why now? Because in 5 months, U.S. President Donald Trump may well go down to election defeat, and an administration under the leadership of the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, he's already said he's opposed to it. Furthermore, according to this argument, the virus presents a good opportunity because most governments around the world are preoccupied with bigger problems of their own, the economic and physical health of their own citizens. So why not now? Opponents of the move say there are 2 factors. Trump and Corona are reasons that now is precisely not the time. Trump, according to this reasoning, is unlikely to be reelected. The U.S. economy is going down. The state of race relations in the United States is not good. The way the government is dealing with the coronavirus in America has turned what looked like a reasonable shot at re-election into a long shot. As such, why tempt fate? Why get off with the new president on the wrong foot if he's opposed to what we do? That's what happened with Barack Obama. Now, this school of thought, which is against sovereignty, argues you don't want to make a move like this during the time of Corona. Some of the worst case scenarios scenarios from the move materialize and there is widespread rioting in the West Bank and rockets flying from Gaza, Israel may be forced to respond with tough military measures, perhaps even mobilizing the reserves and going back into those areas. This would place an additional strain on the economy, which is already under pressure because of the virus. Now, again, why do it at all? Israel has controlled the West Bank area since 1967, and a more or less status quo has emerged. It's not great, but it's not catastrophic. What would change? I myself have a home in Carnation, I've lived there since the last 35 years. And so if you officially annex or apply sovereignty, not a heck of a lot's going to be different. Right now, the areas are under military rule. So Israel law extends to the Israelis living there, and I know this myself, but not to the land. For example, Israel cannot assert a right of eminent domain to take private property for public use in the area there, and what's called the West Bank, where I live. In an area under military rule, you can't expand a road. However, if you apply sovereignty, that will change all that. On the diplomatic front, those in favor say that this would make it clear to everyone that the time has come to abandon the dreams of a complete and total Israeli return to the 1967 lines before the Six-Day War. This is what Abba Eban referred to as the Auschwitz lines. Annexing the territory shows what Israel believes is vital for security and national identity. On a security level, the argument for annexation is that the territories to come under formal Israeli control. First and foremost, the Jordan Valley and the settlements around Jerusalem, these areas are essential for security purposes. The Jordan Valley would place a buffer between Israel and any possible invasion like Iran from the east, and the settlement blocks around Jerusalem protect the capital. Furthermore, annexing settlements on a mountain ridge in Samaria overlooking the coastal plain is essential to prevent rockets from one day being set up there and raining down on Tel Aviv and on the airport. And on a religious historical level, the argument is that areas being incorporated are part of the biblical heartland that God promised to the Jewish people. And after 2,000 years, we have an opportunity to help God make good on his promise. That's how it's looked at by the religious Zionists. The main argument against the move is that the move is unilateral and slams the door to the possibility of a two-state solution. But I don't think there's much chance of a two-state solution. Those against the plan dismiss the Palestinian state envisioned under the Trump plan as a non-starter, because it would only be a terrorist state, it would be non-contiguous, and Israel would retain all the security control. Furthermore, that state fails to meet the Palestinian demands for a capital in East Jerusalem, which Israel will not allow, or for a Palestinian right of return of all the refugees, all the millions of them, which obviously Israel cannot allow. The bottom line is that in deciding whether to go ahead with this type of step, there is a need to weigh the benefits against the risks. Israel's problem is that while it can assess the benefits, the costs are less clear. It's clear the move will infuriate the Palestinians, it will infuriate the Arab world, the Europeans, and much of the Democratic Party in the United States. But it's not clear how far they will take that anger. Will the Palestinians protest and riot for a few days, but then realize it's futile? An even bigger question is whether the president of the Palestinian Authority would carry out his threat to close down the Palestinian Authority and turn the keys back to Israel. Such a move would place a tremendous security and financial burden on Israel at a time when it has to deal intensively with the burden caused by the coronavirus. And if Abbas does indeed shut down the Palestinian Authority, who will move into the vacuum? Will this present Iran with an opportunity to take advantage of the chaos and move in through Hamas and Islamic Jihad? And what about Gaza? Will this move precipitate hundreds, maybe thousands of rockets on the south and even the center of our country? Then there's the concern this will force Jordan's King Abdullah to recall his ambassador and downgrade his ties with Israel. So these are tough questions. Of course, this is not to mention the threats in the Persian Gulf, like the United Arab Emirates. They'll stop cooperating with Israel, and Qatar is going to funnel money into the Gaza Strip. This is a major problem. European countries have threatened that such a move will impact ties with Israel, and there will be surely be moves inside a number of European Union countries to downgrade economic ties. This is a major problem, and it all has to be looked at. I'll obviously speak more about on other occasions. Until next time, take care of yourselves.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.